Welcome to the ExecMBA podcast. I'm your host, Brett Twitty, and you are listening to a new episode. On this episode of the podcast, I'm excited to share my recent conversation with Erin Tollini. Erin is a second year in our Executive MBA class of 2020, and she is actually a two-time guest here on the ExecMBA podcast. I recently invited Erin back on the podcast to talk a little bit more about her startup, Expand My Tribe. So without further ado, here is my conversation with Erin Tollini. Erin, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks. Good to be here.
All right. So you've been on the podcast before, so I guess I should say welcome back to the podcast. But for our listeners who have not had a chance to hear your first podcast interview, which they totally should do, tell us a little bit more about you and your background.
Sure. I used to live on the East Coast. I went to law school and practiced as an attorney in New York City. And then I moved out west, lived in San Francisco for 9 years, where I got involved in local politics. I was mayor of the town of Tiburon before I moved back east a few years ago. And at that point in time, I decided I really wanted to start a business. And I felt like I had a lot of relevant skills from my legal background and my background in local politics. But I definitely felt that there was a skill set that I was missing. And I also didn't have a network in DC, so I really wanted to build that as well. And I decided to go to Darden, and I'm about to graduate in May.
And so it's obviously a very big question, but when you reflect on the roughly 21 months that you've been in the program, any highlights or things that stand out from the past 2 years?
There are a lot of highlights. I've had a really good experience. I would say the thing that I was surprised by is how close I have become to my cohort. I expected to make acquaintances. I expected to build a network. I expected, I guess, some friendships, but I didn't realize how deep those friendships would be and how broad it would really go, that I would make close friends that I count on and I know that I will see after this program and have really been instrumental to me over the past few years, and I'm looking forward to continuing those relationships, after we graduate.
That's a very interesting point, and I think it resonates a lot with what we share with prospective students about the program experience, that this is not a transactional experience. People are not just here to get a degree, they're also here to meet their classmates and develop those relationships. I'm curious what you feel made it possible for you to get to know people so well. Was it the people who were in the room and the nature of those people? Was it the learning experience that you had, some combination of the two? What are your thoughts?
I definitely think it was a combination. As you know well, there's a rigorous selection process of people coming into Darden, and I definitely felt like I was in a room full of my peers who cared about learning, were there to learn, cared about professional development. We're very aware of things going on in the world, ranging from a wide variety of things, from politics to business developments to new technologies. And so I think the types of people that are in the room matters. I also think that the coursework is very conducive to forming friendships. We do a lot of teamwork exercises, a lot of collaboration, a lot of introspection and talking about your strengths and weaknesses and figuring out who you are as a person and as a leader, and then discussing that with your classmates. And I think that really leads to forming real relationships that makes it easy to translate outside the classroom.
You make a great point about teamwork, and this is a time of year where many of our listeners may be incoming students who are preparing to start in August. And curious about whether you used a learning team or a group to help you manage the work. What was your approach?
So I definitely have relied heavily upon my learning team. I don't consider myself a quant person. I had a legal background and did not take a lot of math throughout school. I will say that, as an attorney, I was used to working somewhat alone, and so it wasn't natural for me to lean on my learning team. But they quickly made me realize that they were there for me, that it was not a competitive environment at all, that they wanted me to reach out. And I'm still in the same group as I was day one, the learning team that was assigned to me. And we, have sworn that we will continue to be a team throughout life, and no one can break us apart. So they've been awesome, and I love them.
So for our listeners, tell us a little bit about the mix of people on that team, just high level backgrounds, if you can. I think it's always interesting to hear for people to hear about the sort of composition of the team.
Sure. So originally there was one other female on our team, and she worked as the one of the only female scouts in the NFL. So she had a very unique perspective. And then we recruited another female to join our team who works in media, and she is just very accomplished and aware of everything that's going on in politics and media, and she's been a great addition to our team. One of the gentlemen is an accountant, and he's been my quant to go-to guy, and he's very generous with his time and his knowledge and his skills. And he's also been a big cheerleader for me and starting my own venture, and I really appreciate that. Another guy on our team is in construction, and so he brings just a lot of real world experience and kind of gut check kind of things to our team. And the last gentleman works in security and tech, and so he definitely brings kind of a cutting edge technology perspective to our discussions. And he's also former military, so he has sometimes a different perspective on things. And we just have like a really good synergy. We all work well together. We all like each other. We like to hang out when we're not in class, and it's been a good experience. Team 26 all the way.
So, do you divide the work up? I think these kind of inner workings, it may seem a little trivial, but I think for people who are thinking about how am I going to do this? How am I going to do work and life and school simultaneously? I think it's always interesting to hear about the work approach of each learning team. So, do you divide the cases up? As everybody read the case? How does it work?
So we divide the work up. I personally always did all of the readings myself, but then I would prepare the answers to the questions for whichever readings I was responsible for. And then I would read the answers that my teammates prepared. And then if there was something difficult that some of us were struggling with, we would often get together before class, or in the evening, the night before class, and try and talk through things and work through our spreadsheets and make sure we all kind of knew what was happening. We were all on the same page. So we definitely helped each other through some of those tougher classes.
I am also a lawyer, somewhat similar. And I think one of the things I have always wondered is, how is the case reading that you're doing for your classes at Darden? How does that compare to the reading that you did for law school? Is some of the preparation skills that you had from law school, are they helpful to you here? At Darden, have you had to sort of rethink how you approach case reading? Any thoughts on that?
I think the learning experience, the classroom experience, and the culture is very different from law school and business school. That being said, I will say the case preparation I found to be very similar. I kind of attacked cases in much the same way and analyzed them. And it was very helpful to have that legal background and that preparation and analysis that I used to put into cases then to do so towards my business cases. But that being said, I would say kind of that's where the similarities end.
Well, let's talk about your business. I invited you on the podcast because you are one of the students who in our class of 2020 who is pursuing an entrepreneurial endeavor. And I think that's always a topic that's interesting to our prospective students. One of the things that Jim Collins noted when he came on the podcast to talk about some of the career data for our class of 2019 is that the number of students who expressed an interest in entrepreneurship actually grew over the course of the 21 months in the program, which maybe our listeners would not have expected to hear. So tell us about, you mentioned you had this sort of startup interest. What initially appealed to you about pursuing an entrepreneurial path?
So I think I've always had somewhere in the back of my head that eventually I wanted to start a business. I have always had the entrepreneurial gene. When I was a kid, my sister and I would go door to door trying to sell things, whatever our latest scheme of the month was. And then when I was in college, I started an events calendar and kind of had a business going with that for a while. And I've always just been fascinated by the idea of building something and creating something and forming a workplace that epitomizes the type of culture that I would like to work in and day out, and the type of team that I would like to surround myself with. So when I left California and came here, I decided, well, there's no better time than the present. I've always wanted to do this. This seems like a great time to do it. And my kids are in school now, so I have the energy and the time and the resources to commit to it. So like I said, that was one of the main reasons I decided to go to Darden, was the time for me is now.
So when you started down this path saying, okay, now this is the time for me to do something entrepreneurial, did you have an idea as to what you wanted to do, a rough sketch, or were you hoping to figure that out? I'm curious about the arc of your entrepreneurial idea. Where did you start? Where are you now? How did you get from point A to point B?
Sure. When I started, I had about 10 ideas. I'm very good at generating ideas. It's harder for me to sit down and follow through, but I had a lot of ideas. And I'd say the arc was, when I started, I just started talking to people about my ideas and, what resonates with you? Do you think this would work? Do you think that would work? I would talk to professors. I would talk to classmates. And one of the really pivotal classes for me was our professional advancement course. And I had a coaching session with our Professor Dunlop, regarding, all of my ideas. And I felt like I was so scattered and I needed to focus, and I really wanted to launch something upon graduation. But in order for me to launch, I needed to pick something. And she really gave me some great advice, which was, you can do anything you want, but you can't do it all at once. So just decide what you want to do now. And just because, you've chosen to do this one thing now, doesn't mean that you can't do these other 9 ideas, but you just need to decide the timing of them. And that was such good advice, because it made me prioritize, well, what do I want to do right now? And I really started focusing on what I was most excited, the idea that I was most excited about, the idea that I was most drawn to, the idea that I kind of already do for my friends for free now anyway. So it's like, well, how could I monetize that? And that's how I settled upon the venture that I'm working on now, which is called Expand My Tribe.
Tell us more about that venture.
So, as I said, I moved from California to DC, and I was very connected in California. I had lots of different groups of friends, mom friends, hiking friends, neighborhood friends, book club friends. And then I moved to DC, and I had one friend, and she was very busy. And so all of a sudden I realized, I was kind of lonely, and I realized that there are pivotal points in people's lives where it's hard as a friend to make, it's hard as an adult to make new friends. And whether it be when you first move, or whether you have a career transition, or you go through a divorce, or your kids have left the house, or some points where it's not as natural in life to make friends. And I realized, if this is a pain point for me, and I consider myself very social and I make friends easily, that it could be a pain point for people in general. And I was already doing a lot of matchmaking dating apps for my friends, helping them get on dating apps and write profiles and talk to guys. And so my idea was kind of like, what if we took a dating app and geared it towards making meaningful relationships? And that could be a date, but that could also just be trying to look for a friend to go on a hike with, a friend to play tennis with, something that starts out with a shared interest, but you go into it with an intentionality that you're looking for meaningful and deep and caring relationships. And it's not just surface, and it's not just, as a lot of the dating apps are today, something that's transactional and, you see somebody once and then you drop off the face of the earth, but something that's very different, that addresses the real problem of loneliness and social disconnect that's frankly rampant in the US today.
I mean, that's certainly, I think anybody can kind of relate to that, right? It's a time where we perhaps have never been more connected, but maybe it's a superficial connection.
Yes, and that's a good point. I think, I've done a lot of research on the issue, and research shows that about 47% of adults in the US are lonely. And part of the problem is that we have broad but shallow networks. And social media and all the interconnectedness that we have tends to be very shallow and not deep. And it's people, I think sometimes people don't even realize how lonely and disconnected they are. And I think other people do realize, but don't really know how to fix it. And I think ironically, this technology that has promulgated social media and this disconnect can also be the bridge that can really foster social connectedness if done in an intentional way.
Makes a lot of sense to hear you describe it that way. I'm curious, though, it's a world in which there are so many apps. How do you think about penetrating that sort of consciousness and saying, okay, well, yes, there's, however many dating apps, there's how many other kinds of apps that just exist. How do you think about getting to the point where when people think about, I want to meet people, that they think about using your app?
There are many, many apps. There really is not, I do think though there's a gap in the marketplace right now for an app that is focused on meeting people in a meaningful way with a social connectedness and a responsibility to each other and a seriousness about it that when I say I'll show up, I do. And I bring my authenticity and I'm open. And I think that there are really not any apps out there right now that are encouraging that, trying to foster that. There are a lot of ways that I'm going to try to foster that on my website with blogs about how to address loneliness and, getting past the excuses of why we maybe know that we need to be more socially connected, but we just don't put in the effort to make it happen. And honestly, I think right now in this time in history where we are all quarantined and really missing our friends and our family and those social connections, that this is a prime opportunity in history for an app like this to really gain traction and find users who I think will connect with the mission and the message.
It's an interesting idea that something that could be potentially the root of the problem, whether you think of like a social network or app, could also be part of the solution. That same technology could help solve the problem.
Right. And I think that it's really how people go about it. And part of it is the way that the apps are designed and set up. And for instance, Tinder is set up to be something where you swipe through and you look at a few photos, and it's really designed to make decisions based on very shallow characteristics. And people, I think, don't expect relationships they make on Tinder to be deep and long lasting, although sometimes they are. But I don't think that's the expectation going in. And so the question is, how do you flip that paradigm and how do you create a community that really is looking for something different and something more meaningful? And I think setting out the expectations on the app from the outset is one way, just saying, everyone who is here for a different reason. And if you're here, please honor that and expect to show up with integrity and being open-minded and really wanting to meet people and making real friendships. And if you're not, there are 100 other apps out there for you.
I had a chance to spend a little bit of time on your website prior to the call, and do you want to talk about some of the ideas you have for how to connect people? Recognize we're all at home these days, and hanging out mostly by ourselves or with our families, immediate families, roommates. But in a world in which we're able to leave our homes, what might that look like?
Sure. So I currently have a beta site of my website up and running. It's expandmytribe.com. And my initial thought is, until I have a concentrated enough user base, that I'm just going to put useful content on my website. And it's geared toward the DC area right now. There's a curated list of cool things to do in the area, whether it's for a night out or a daytime outing with friends or on a date or with a group. And once I sign up enough people in a certain zip code that I feel like it's ready to launch and go live, then I plan to connect people based on shared interests. So when you sign up, there'll be boxes like, I want to find a date, I want to make friends, I want to meet a group of friends, or all of the above. And then these are the types of things I like to do. These are the types of people I would like to meet. Understanding that I really am emphasizing that this is about putting yourself out there, getting out of the house, not expecting every outing to result in a BFF or your soulmate, but just getting out of the house, doing the things you like to do, having fun, enriching your life, living a full life. And if you're doing those things on a regular basis, you're bound to find people that you connect with and expand your tribe. And so when the outings feature goes live, you'll be able to scroll through lists of outings if you've checked that you only want to meet people as platonic friends, and the only things that will show up in your feed are so-and-so has an extra ticket to the baseball game this weekend. Would you like to go? So-and-so would like to go on a picnic at Great Falls on Saturday and bring their dog. Would you like to join? And things like that. And then hopefully it'll be a little more fun than that, with kind of like ad libs, like, yes, I'll come and I'll bring and there'll be a blank. And you can say, I'll bring a chocolate cake, or I'll bring my tunes, or whatever. And connect people based on that. Eventually, I would like to incorporate some machine learning and some AI to gather some data about what types of things people would likely enjoy, even if they don't necessarily do those things right now. So for instance, if you're somebody who plays volleyball regularly on Thursdays, maybe the data shows that you would also really enjoy poker night on Sundays, but that's something you've never tried. So then I would like to be able to suggest to people, here's somebody who's organizing a poker night on Sunday. Would you like to join? These look like your types of people. I think you really enjoy this and have fun. Why don't you check it out? Things like that.
That's all really, really interesting as you think about sort of how to build those connections and anticipate what somebody might be interested in, even if they haven't necessarily signed up for something like that. How do you think about this relative to something like Meetup, which has obviously a social connection feature to it? You know, I'm a music fan and do look at some of the meetups from time to time where people are just going to a concert, or people have a shared interest and enjoy like getting together and playing guitar. How do you think about this idea versus that?
There are definitely some similarities. I plan to have an outings feature for groups on my site, which is definitely a similar concept. I think the difference is that you can go along on a meetup for, weeks or months on end and not necessarily make any meaningful relationships. For instance, you could, play guitar with groups of people who they get together and they play guitar and they stop playing at 1:00 and everybody goes home. And I think it's different to get together with a group of people who share interests when the shared interest is the point, and versus getting together with a group of people and making meaningful relationships is the point. So the activities could be the same, but if you know that you're getting together with people who are really looking for conversations outside of playing guitar and who really want to connect about things like their families and whatever else is going on in their lives, then it's a platform to make those introductions, but everyone knows that everyone there is looking for something a little more intentional. And the same is if you're looking for a date and you want to be dating someone and you show up to a group volleyball game, but you know that everyone else there is single and they're really looking for meaningful relationships. I think that is a whole different vibe than if you just met up with a group of people on Meetup.
No, that makes a lot of sense, and recognize that you put a lot of thought and time and effort into developing this idea. If you had to sort of say how long it has taken you to kind of get to this point, would you say, basically since I started the program, longer than that? Always curious about the incubation period of these ideas.
I've definitely been kicking around different ideas for a few years. I would say I focused in on this idea about a year ago, and I've worked on it with concentrated effort, much more concentrated effort the past few months, as I've had some more bandwidth with my school obligations. So it's just kind of been, I guess, an evolution from the funnel, of a lot of ideas kind of funneling down to this idea, and then funneling down further from it being an idea to, okay, now how am I going to execute it?
So how has Darden helped you develop this idea? I can think back to maybe when you were first considering the program, I think you may have connected with MJ Toms and maybe some other folks at Darden might have helped you plug into the Darden network, but I'm curious about whether there are classes or people that have been really helpful to you as you sort of progressed along your entrepreneurial journey.
Yes. So yes, MJ Toms and Jason Brewster at the Batten Institute have always been willing to talk through ideas with me and bounce things around and connect me with people. And I very much appreciate them for that. There also have been professors. I mentioned the the PAC class, which was very instrumental to me. And then as we got later into the program, I got to take some entrepreneurial electives, which were very helpful. Took an entrepreneurial thinking class, an entrepreneurial finance class, a starting new ventures class. I did an independent study with Professor Saraswati, who is the starting new ventures professor. And she really helped me kind of hone down on this idea. So I think the class work and the professors at Darden have been so key in helping me develop and implement this idea. And then I also have to just really also give a shout out to my classmates, because so many of them are pursuing their own entrepreneurial ventures and have been so generous with their time and their ideas and willing to talk to me about different things they're doing and share their resources for app development and bounce ideas off, about what I should do next and connect me with the right people for just various different things. And I sent out a survey to my classmates, and I had about 65 people respond about how they currently use dating apps or have used dating apps or would be interested in a friendship app. And so, I can't explain how much it means to me to have that encouragement and that support and that level of knowledge and skill base of my friends that are willing to help me out. That's been huge also.
So regarding that survey, were there surprises when you asked people for their feedback, or did it confirm what you were thinking already?
So honestly, when I sent out that survey, I was planning on doing a straight dating app. And from the survey, I realized that there is actually a large appetite for people to have a similar type app, but just for finding friends. And people were saying, yes, I used to be on the dating apps, but now I'm a little older and I really like to find someone platonically. And I realized, a lot of the apps are kind of geared towards the 25 and under generation. And the research shows when people turn 25, their social circles start to constrict. And so I started thinking about, well, what would the app for the 25 to 45 demographic look like? And maybe it's not just dating. Maybe it's more how our lives evolve. And we want friendships and relationships beyond just a significant other. We want, I think, not just the coronavirus era, but also this time in history, people are becoming more and more aware of how meaningful relationships shape their lives and the importance of them. And I think people are looking for something deeper than they have been in the past. And so I think I started thinking about that and realizing that from the survey and from following up with people after the survey saying, oh, tell me more about what this would look like for you. So that was really a pivot point for me also.
It's a really interesting point, because I was thinking as you were talking about how people sort of historically have made these kind of social connections, whether it's through civic organizations or a church or, just some of these larger organizations that people join that provide an immediate community. I'm not sure we're necessarily still a nation of joiners in that way. And it just kind of maybe left some of us out there looking for other ways to connect.
Right. And I think a lot of people have a certain loneliness because they're not involved in those types of communities. And I think there's also a social stigma around saying that. I think it's awkward for people to say, I don't have enough close friends. I don't know how to make friends. I don't know where to go. And, I've done Google searches of how do I make friends? And it's kind of what we were talking about earlier, join a meetup or volunteer. And those can be avenues for making meaningful friends, but it's not a targeted avenue for making meaningful friends. And I think people resist avenues that they are not sure going to produce results. Everyone's busy. Everyone has a lot of things going on. And I think that there's a hesitancy to commit to one more thing if it's not something that is geared towards the type of relationships that you're looking for. So I'm hoping to remove some of that friction and some of that awkwardness by providing a community that's established. That's exactly what people are looking for.
So we get naturally a lot of questions. So people are interested in the core curriculum, but we get a lot of prospective student questions about electives. And you mentioned doing an independent study, and I'm sure some of our listeners would love to hear more about what that looked like, what it entailed. How closely did you work with Professor Saraswati through that process? Do you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. So my first decision point was when it made sense to do the independent study. And I actually can't even remember now who I was talking to, but I was talking to someone about when it made sense. And they were saying, well, it might make sense to do it right before the Starting New Ventures class, which is in Q10, because then you could roll that work right into Starting New Ventures, which the whole point of Starting New Ventures is to actually get out there and start something. So it was like whatever traction you're gaining, that would dovetail nicely into that Q10 course. So I decided to do it in Q9, which I think was good timing. I also only signed up for one other elective in Q9, which was the entrepreneurial finance, because I knew that was going to be hard. And between wanting to devote a lot of time and energy to my independent study and wanting to do well in that class, I decided that that was enough on my plate. So I worked with Professor, she just says to call her Sarah. So I worked with her, and we kind of came up with a game plan of what made the most sense. Originally, I was thinking maybe I should come up with a business plan, and she had me watch a bunch of her videos, and she was pretty much, her bottom line was, you can waste a lot of time and energy coming up with a paper business plan that's going to look nothing like your venture when you actually start it. Don't you think it makes more sense to actually start something? And I think that was really good advice. So I basically, started a website. It didn't exist until my independent study. And I, researched which web host to use. I did that all myself. I did hire an app developer to sketch a prototype of what I wanted my app to look like during my independent study. And, I sent her kind of feedback. I sent her, this is what I'm thinking I'm going to do now. How do you feel about that? And we would get on the phone, and she would say, I don't know. I think you should also call 10 people who've done things like this. Just figure out people in this space that have made these types of apps work and ask them how they did. So I did. I would just hit people up on LinkedIn and cold call them and say, especially people who weren't developers that started apps, because I don't have a tech background. And so, for instance, I talked to Nirav Tolia, who started Nextdoor, which, has a lot of similar features. And I'm like, how did you start this? How did you gain traction? How did you acquire customers? And, he was just super helpful. And I had a list of, 9 other entrepreneurs that I talked to that did not have a tech background, that started a social networking app, and just picked their brain about how they got it going and how they ramped up. And I was also pleasantly surprised about how generous people were with their time and their ideas, and just kind, and giving me feedback and saying, if you ever need my help, please call me. And it was a really good experience.
How did their feedback in those conversations shape your thinking about your business?
So I will say, before I started Darden, one of my biggest problems when I would come up with a business idea is I would have this great idea, and then I had a lot of time, and I would think, okay, I'm going to get up tomorrow. I have 8 hours. What should I do on this business? And I wouldn't have a clue where to start. I would just be sitting there with a blank sheet of paper being like, I know how to incorporate it, but then I don't know where to go from there. And so when I started calling these entrepreneurs, they gave me so many ideas. They're like, you should do this and this and this. And I have a notebook full of things that I'll never have time to do. I mean, it's just so many great ideas, so many resources, so many things. They're like, oh, check this thing out online and go look at this. And then, maybe you should think about, for instance, in Nextdoor, he hired ambassadors. And I know Bumble BFF hires ambassadors, kind of like people to go out and, tell about your brand and get people planning events and signing up. And so I started kind of thinking about that and just different things. So I think the way they helped me the most was just to give me so many ideas about what my next steps could be. And then it's just really drilling down into what makes the most sense for the direction I want to take it. But I'm not stuck anymore. I have so many different things that I could pursue, and that I, will pursue the ones that make the most sense for me. And that's so exciting.
So where are you right now with your business? I recognize we're recording this. Graduation is on the horizon. You've got LR2, and then you'll be done. And so where are you with your business right now?
So my goal this summer is to find enough users in one zip code that it makes sense to launch in the fall in that zip code. And I'm planning on doing that by connecting with people who are moving into the area initially. I definitely want to expand to everyone. And I might also initially connect with my Darden classmates as well. But I really want to focus on people who are in a pivotal point in their life where they're seeking new relationships. And so once I hit that point where I'm ready to launch, then I'm going to launch the outings feature where I connect people and try to get them to go out on outings. And really, I'm going to be looking at that time for a lot of customer feedback too. I want to make sure that whatever I'm developing, my customers love it. And if they love it enough that they say, yes, this is awesome, and I want to tell my friends about it, then I'll kind of know I'm on the right track. And if I'm not there, I'm going to have to figure out what I need to change to make people love it. Because that's one of my initial focuses is a site that is doing what I'm setting out to do, which is to help people form meaningful relationships, help end loneliness, help do it in a fun way that people are really enjoying the experience. And then once I have some traction in this area and people love it, then I'll start expanding. I'll probably look into fundraising at some point. And once I'm in expansion mode, hopefully I can get a team together and develop an app and start rolling it out in other cities. And that's kind of my plan for the next couple of years.
So has, I guess the question that's on everybody's mind these days, has what's going on in the world, obviously with the coronavirus pandemic, has that changed any of your planning or how you're thinking about this initial launch or the timing of the launch? Has it shifted things for you at all?
Well, as I said, I definitely think that it has made this point in history especially ripe for this type of venture. I think that people are really realizing that now is the time that they could use something like this. And I think as we emerge from this time of social distancing, people will really be wanting meaningful relationships and wanting to meet up in real life with other people and do things. And I think, that this whole coronavirus has just made the timing of my idea really, really applicable. And I think it's going to really resonate with people. My initial plan this summer was to kind of like go knock on doors and talk to some of the people who live in these big apartment or who own these big apartment buildings in Tyson's and talk to some moving companies. And I'm not sure exactly how that's all going to play out now. I definitely plan to be more on the phone and see if I can still connect with people who have connections with people moving into the area. I know people are still moving for essential reasons. There'll probably be less people that are moving. And then I wasn't planning to launch my outings feature until fall. I'm really hopeful that our lives will be back to normal by fall. And obviously, if they're not, then I'll have to change the launch date on that. But if they are, then I should be able, hopefully, to proceed as planned and really provide an avenue for people who really want to get together with people who are looking for real friendships.
No, you make a great point about social connection. I do think that what's going on in the world has forced so many of us to focus on things that matter, things that are maybe more important than other things. All this kind of reflection, and so it'll be interesting to see how things progress here for sure with your business, and obviously, we'll be very interested on the podcast to hear about the next phase. It sounds like you're going to have a test market and then go from there. Yes, this summer. So yeah, I'd love to come back and let you know how it's going once I get some traction and some users and some feedback. Yes. Excellent. And anybody who's listening, feel free to go check it out. expandmytribe.com. So Erin, one last question. We typically wrap up with the same last question. What advice would you have for prospective students who are thinking about Darden?
I would just say that Darden is a special place. And if you're, it was not an easy decision for me, honestly. Originally, when I was trying to decide whether to go to business school, I thought, well, I could take the same amount of time and money and pour it into a venture, and maybe that would serve me better than spending this time in school. And so I really kind of weighed that out. I decided that, I kind of knew I didn't have a lot of traction on my own, and I decided, well, let's pour that time and money somewhere else and see if that gets me somewhere else. But I really did not know how much it was going to impact me. So I guess my advice would be, if you're considering it and it really resonates with you and it's some sort of fear that's keeping you from making the decision, you should definitely go for it. And then my other advice is, once you've decided to go to Darden, just really be open to it. Be open to meeting new people and leaning into the relationships that you're forming and trusting that it's going to be a life-changing experience, and you'll come out with people who are going to be by your side the rest of your life, whether it's as a business partner or a friend or a mentor or just someone who you can call and kick ideas around with. And I just think going into it with that type of open mindset is very beneficial.
Erin, those are all great points and certainly resonate with us and the admissions team. So happy for the experience that you've had here, and obviously thrilled that you're right here at the end about to graduate. Congratulations on everything you've accomplished, and we'll have to get you back on the podcast. So we always give the entrepreneurs one last opportunity to plug their business. So remind everybody what the name of your company is and where they can find you.
Sure. So Expand My Tribe is the name of my company. I currently have a website in beta mode called expandmytribe.com. So you can go on there and check out all the different things that I've curated or things to do in DC, and sign up for the outings feature when it goes live, and read about making meaningful connections. And, I hope anybody who takes stock and says, yeah, I would like to have more meaningful connection in my life, thinks about using Expand My Tribe as a way to meet other people, and really puts the effort into making those connections, because it really makes a difference in quality of life. And that's just not my opinion. When you delve into the research that's documented and verified and affects people's health, and it's just really an important thing that I think has not been widely recognized as it should.
Well, thank you again. Sorry we couldn't obviously be in person for this, but it's always great to talk with you, and hope you and your family are doing well during this time, and thanks for taking time out for the podcast.
Thanks. I appreciate it. Stay safe.
And that was my conversation with Erin Tollini, an Executive MBA format student in our class of 2020. As always, if you have any comments, suggestions, requests, anything you'd like for us to cover here on the podcast, we're all ears. We can be reached at exec, that's EXEC, MBA at darden.virginia.edu. And until next time, stay safe, be well, and thanks for listening.